ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to our discussion on an important subject, the Greek-British relations after Brexit. We have with us distinguished speakers, His Excellency, the Ambassador of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Mr. Matthew Lodge. We have Mr. Costas Mitropoulos, the co-chair of Greek-British Symposium, and the other co-chair of the Greek-British Symposium, Lord Francis Maude. Welcome to all of you. In June 2016, Europe and the rest of the world were shocked when, against all odds, the British people vote on Brexit. And after that vote, Great Britain is not any longer a member of the European Union, of the European family, and this had implications on the relationship with all the European countries and all over the world. Please, starting from His Excellency the Ambassador, can you give us an introductory statement on the state of the Greek-British relations after Brexit?
Thank you, Dimitris, and thank you very much to the organisers for giving me the chance to come to the Delphi Forum this year. Listening to your opening remarks, it's striking that it's almost 6 years ago since that referendum result. But I would say, and perhaps you'd expect me to say this, but it is genuine, that I remain very confident and optimistic about the Greek-British relationship going forward. Let me give you four brief reasons why I hold that view. It's not just because I'm the first British ambassador to arrive since we actually left the European Union, but it is because that vote and the nature of that vote was and remains a clear democratic expression of the view of the British people. And the government, subsequently, governments, set about making sure that that vote was followed through. And we duly left the European Union, the institutions of the European Union, some 15 months ago now. And there were lots of predictions, and there will be lots of media commentary and historians will write for years to come on the Brexit subject. But I think it's important to say the following. That was a vote to leave the institutions of the European Union. It was not a vote to leave Europe. And it was not an expression of some rejection of what being Europe or being part of the European continent is about for the United Kingdom. Secondly, I think it's important to recognise that even if it has taken almost 6 years since that referendum vote, we are still in a process of adaptation and adjustment. And I think that is perfectly understandable after going on more than 45 years of membership of the European Community, European Union. Thirdly, for the UK, much has not changed at all. And we'll come on to this, no doubt, in our discussions a little bit later. But we still see the United Kingdom as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, the United Kingdom as one of the world's leading economies in the G7, the United Kingdom as a leading European power in NATO, and many other international institutions to boot. And the responsibilities that the UK has and will continue to fulfill remain unchanged because of a change in our relationship, our institutional relationship with Brussels and the European Union. And fourthly, for the UK-Greek relationship specifically, even if we are going through a process of necessary adaptation and change post-Brexit, and we've already seen some of the impacts of that, whether on student flows or freedom of movement more generally. But much of what was predicted to happen hasn't happened. And the fundamental foundations of our partnership, which not only goes back through generations, but actually goes way beyond institutional political structures. Those foundations remain strong and robust now, and I'm confident that they will do in the future. And you only need to look at Greeks in the City of London, or Greeks who've studied and understood the UK as children, or who are sending their children there to study now. You only need to look at the huge raft of British academics and historians who demonstrate daily their affection for and deep knowledge of Greece and Greece's place in the world. Millions of tourists, or certainly hundreds of thousands of tourists pre-pandemic, people-to-people contacts. So there is a huge amount to be positive about, but we have a lot of work to do as we work through that adaptation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Mr. Mitropoulos.
Well, Greek-British relations were strong before the European Union. They were reinterpreted in a particular way in the multilateral context of the Union, and now they're again bilateral. They were strong, and I hope they will remain strong. And they cut across 5 dimensions, and I'll speak about the economic side more. There's trade to the tune of 5 billion euros a year between the two countries, which is roughly 2% of the Greek GDP, which is a very significant amount. There is tourism. Around 3 million Britons come to Greece every year, living approximately 3 billion euros as spending 3 billion euros in this country. There is education, where in the last census or so there are 10,000 Greek students in the UK, there are 70,000 Greeks working in the UK with the students, and there is an ethnic minority, Greek ethnic minority of almost 300,000 people. There is a lot, or there used to be, a lot of FDIs from the UK coming into Greece. The current stock is about $1.5 billion euros. It has gone down over the last few years, but we hope that it will recover. And there is the security, as something that the ambassador touched upon, the two countries belonging to NATO and sharing some, I won't say same, but similar geopolitical anxieties in Eastern Mediterranean. And again, the ambassador touched upon the fact that underneath those 5 dimensions, it's culture, is the shared values between the two nations and the people that made these relationships possible before the European Union, during the tenure of Britain in the European Union, and will make them strong again after that. It's the shared values that occasionally become the object of debate, as with the bubbles, but it's the shared values that is the real strength of the relationship between the two countries.
Thank you very much, Lord Maude.
Well, thank you. My starting point is as someone who, in my time in government, I spent a lot of my time deeply involved in European Union matters. I was Minister for Europe in the late 80s. I negotiated a lot of the single market measures. I sat in the Internal Market Council. I negotiated some of the Maastricht Treaty and indeed was one of its signatories and deeply immersed in it. I was neutral in the Brexit referendum. And I would just take issue with one thing you said in your introduction, where you said Britain had left the European Union and the European family. I don't agree with the second part of that.
Of course, I meant family with a tight...
Yeah, well, as the ambassador said, it was the European Union institutions. We still regard ourselves as a European nation, a deeply European nation, and just as much as Norway or Switzerland, both of which are countries with a deep European heritage who had the option to join the European Union but decided through referenda not to join it. Britain is in the same position, slightly different because we did join and then decided to leave, but nonetheless just as embedded in the European family of nations. And I think this is something which has taken on a new life in dreadful circumstances of the last few weeks, where the shocking events in Ukraine, the invasion of an independent sovereign country, which is emphatically one of the European family of nations, has drawn together that family, that European family, very closely in defense of its values and to protect its values. So I think in a funny way, there have been, if one looks for positives out of what is a shocking episode and continuingly terrible episode, it is actually a closer alignment of that European family, including the leadership and people of Ukraine. Just specifically on the Greek-British relationship, it's always been strong. I mean, when I was dealing with European matters, I dealt on a routine basis with my Greek colleagues and friends and counterparts. And what I think was good was in the immediate aftermath of the Brexit referendum, there was a decision to set up the Greek-British Symposium, which Costas and I are co-chairs of, with deep involvement from the ambassador here and his counterpart in London, to make sure that those ties strengthened, that we just made sure that those ties, that relationship was not dependent on us being part of the same institutional framework. And in a funny way, I think they've intensified. The relationship has intensified since, because we're paying much more specific attention to that bilateral relationship rather than assuming it would just be part of a big 28 nations set of relationships. And it is important. There are strong ties. We have a lot in common, a long history. We're maritime, outward-looking nations, trading nations. And that's a big part of our heritage. And these are things that bind us. But will there be much more that we can do to strengthen those links? For sure. And we'll have a very enjoyable time strengthening and deepening those relationships.
Thank you very much, Lord. My next question is, you touched upon the crisis in Ukraine. The illegal invasion by Russia on an independent country at the heart of Europe created new circumstances and became immediately understood the role of Great Britain can play in Europe because of defense. There is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, even discussion for Great Britain to assume a chair role in a defense, the construction of a new European defense. Great Britain is a member of NATO, Greece is a member of NATO, in a very, we can say, difficult and very sensitive area of the alliance. We have this energy issue in Europe. It's also a big issue for Great Britain. The Eastern Mediterranean reserves are talked a lot the last few days about one of the main components of disengagement from Russia. How the bilateral relationship between Greece and Great Britain can contribute to all these important issues, considering the fact that Cyprus is a very big part of the Eastern Mediterranean energy reserves, and you know the problems with Turkey and all this. Let's go the opposite way, start with you, my lord, and then conclude with the ambassador this round.
Well, starting with defence, the UK is a big player in defence, and that's important. The anxiety, I think, in Britain, we always had about intensifying the European Union defence entity, if you like, was the danger of it weakening NATO by creating sort of dual running institutions. NATO is crucial, and it's through that NATO's structure that a lot of the support for Ukraine is happening. Not all of it obvious, but really important, and that must continue. And will continue, and I know Greece is playing a strong role in that. On energy, look, this is a work in progress. No one, well, I mean, I was going to say no one saw this coming. I think some people did see dangers in becoming too dependent on Russian fossil fuels, and now that danger has become a reality, finding the answers to that as a matter of some urgency is increasingly important. I'm not very close to the issues around Cyprus, and that my colleagues will know more about that than I do, but that our interests are pretty closely aligned, I would say, is important.
Mr. Mitropoulos?
Well, the Ukraine crisis made us all very aware of two things: the need to protect the values of our society, which is called security in the broader sense of the term, and our energy dependence on third parties outside Europe. And I'm not talking just to Russia, because Europe as a whole imports oil and gas from Africa as well, and from the United States. So we became aware of two things that over the years had ceased to be on the forefront of the political agenda. They were not discussed much. And individual countries followed different policies. Germany very clearly followed a sort of a cooperation with Russia policy in energy. Other countries, Spain and Portugal, they import most of their gas in form of LNG from other sources. I think it's the time that as Europe and not as European Union, we develop a common approach to the security of the land and to energy sustainability, so that we always enjoy free and unencumbered access to whatever energy we need. On this arena, there will be multilateral cooperation amongst all the European countries, but Britain can play an important role, first of all, because it's a strong military power in the security side, part of NATO, and with a strong defense industry as well. And Greece on the energy side, because energy not coming to Europe through Russia, a part of it could go to Europe through Greece. The government has more than once, repeatedly, I would say, claimed that Greece can become an energy hub. It can become an energy hub, not overnight, obviously. It needs a lot of effort, diplomatic and political effort to do that, and technical effort for that matter. But it can become a hub for non-Russian energy flows into Europe. And to play the role of a hub, Greece needs to be interconnected with the rest of Europe in the electricity network and the gas network. Britain has another role that can play in this sort of two-pole problem, the defense and the security. Is one of the countries very strong on mobilizing global capital and being able to finance investment on the energy side, on the defense side, on the infrastructure side. So it's a lever for mobilizing, I would say, global capital, definitely European capital, and funnel it and channel it to investments that are relevant to energy and the defense of Europe as a whole.
Thank you very much. Ambassador?
Thank you. I'll try and just add a few thoughts to complement what Lord Maude and Mr. Mitropoulos have said. 4 points quickly, I think, from me. I arrived in the autumn, which of course was the last part of Greece's bicentenary year. And I found myself attending various commemorations across Greece, including not far from here, where I was stood alongside a colleague from the French embassy and a representative from the embassy of the Russian Federation. Now, I remember at the time, this is before we knew that Putin was going to do what he's done in Ukraine, I remember at the time thinking, well, this is interesting. This reveals the historical origins of Hellenism and the role of the great powers at the time. But I would argue it's also relevant today. It's relevant today because if we worry and we look at the UK's role in the defence space, prior to Brexit, the United Kingdom and France were the two leading military powers in the European Union, both NATO allies carrying a disproportionate share of the weight for European partners. That didn't change because the United Kingdom left the European Union. It leaves France as the sole leading EU member state. Interesting to see what the Germans are now doing and how quickly they ramp that up.
That's a whole new discussion.
That's a whole other discussion. But the UK is still there, alongside France, as Lord Maude has said, as a leading European military power with a global perspective and reach and ambition. And that brings us back to the Eastern Mediterranean neighbourhood. As I said before, our responsibilities in the UN and elsewhere are deeply held and have not changed. We continue to advocate actively in the United Nations and with the parties for progress on a settlement in Cyprus. None of us, I think, certainly sat here in Greece, can look at what's happening in Ukraine and not think about the Cypriot dimension and what happened 48 years ago there. And we will continue to work to support a just settlement there as well. But if you then think about the Ukraine crisis, it just so happened that France was holding the presidency of the European Union. And there's been lots of commentary for people who maybe are looking through the narrow prism of one set of institutional labels or responsibilities or another. But if you look across the piece, actually what we've seen is the UK, irrespective of whether we were any longer a European Union member state, play an active, dynamic, and in many respects leading role, working with our US partners, making available intelligence prior to the invasion, where there was a live debate, galvanizing the response, but in partnership with Paris, with Athens, with European capitals. So in a way that actually, from a defense and security and foreign policy perspective, I would argue shows us just as present as we would have been 24 months ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, and in some ways more engaged. On the energy point, I mean, that clearly is important, and this plays a little bit to Costas's comments about the economic dimension. The UK, as with a number of other European nations, is not as dependent as some. I think we've received something like 3% of our gas supply from Russia. That clearly gives the British government a degree of manoeuvre that is not enjoyed by Lithuania, for example, or Slovakia, who's so wholly dependent.
Because of the nuclear power.
But you saw, again, the UK, once we had left the European Union, not a relevant issue, leading COP26 in Glasgow and the international climate emergency, climate change debate. That's why you've got British companies engaging here in central Greece, but with the Greek government, about using British know-how and expertise in the renewable space, offshore wind, solar, hydrogen, to help explore the scope for investment in the Greek economy, to help Greece, along with other partners who are more dependent, move along that road and that journey towards reducing energy dependency on the Russian Federation. So I would argue that actually on all of those issues that we've talked about, there is a positive story to tell, and I think it tells itself in many ways.
Thank you very much. Let's get to the economic issues. After Brexit, the UK is working hard to have agreements, economic agreements, like with the United States, like with many countries around the world. And as all of you mentioned, we have a long traditional relationship, Greece and Great Britain. We have the big community of ship owners in London. You mentioned the thousands of our students. And we hope that we can find a common ground there to lower a little bit the cost for our students to continue to come to Great Britain. And all the things you mentioned, Ambassador, on energy, on the companies, and of course tourism. Do you foresee, all of you, the possibility of a comprehensive agreement, a bilateral agreement on economic issues between Great Britain and Greece? Ambassador?
Well, let me say two things. There is already a comprehensive agreement. It's called the TCA. It was what the United Kingdom signed with the European Union when we left, and that is the framework which now governs the economic relationship, not just between Greece and the United Kingdom, but between the United Kingdom and the European Union.
I mean something more specific, you know.
We signed, I didn't sign it, Foreign Minister Dendias and Foreign Secretary Truss at the end of October last year signed one of, I think, the first, actually, strategic bilateral framework with our European partners beyond the big players who we already had existing bilateral agreements with. And that sets out an ambitious agenda across the whole span of the bilateral relationship, including defence, security, culture, education, but also business and economics. We are not in the business between the UK and Greece of seeking another bespoke bilateral trade and economic arrangement across the piece, because we have the framework of our European Union. But what we are in the business of doing is using the full flexibility of that agreement and playing to our respective strengths. I talked about renewables just a moment ago, but supporting education is another one, tourism we've talked about, shipping, a big issue, the City of London, services, all of those respective existing strengths to make sure that we are now capitalising on those to the best effect. And frankly, that's my responsibility over my tenure here in Greece for the next 3 years, I hope, to give some substance to that, because we've got the pieces in place. We now need to make a reality of it.
Mitropoulos?
Well, as the ambassador said, there is the European Union-Great Britain agreement that covers all the basics. There is I would say, an MOU, a framework of understanding between the two countries bilaterally, which covers practically everything. I think the important thing is not signing agreements, actually making the relationships work in actual fact. And there is enough, an ample space to do more work between the two countries. You can expand trades if you have the right products and the right services for each other. On tourism, there is a move, particularly in Greece, from package tourism to experience-based tourism, which I believe will attract a lot of Britons, more than it's already attracting. There are a lot of investment opportunities in Greece, and I'm not talking about corporate investments, I'm talking about investments in infrastructure mainly, that could attract private capital. And as I said earlier, London still is a huge financial center that can mobilize capital. So I don't think there is a need for any more agreements and any more specification of the relationship on paper. It's actually getting people together from the two countries to work. And I think the Greek-British Symposium, that's the purpose of it, to actually bring human beings from the two countries with a common purpose to discuss the same, to discuss along the same lines problems that they face in doing business. I think it will progress, and I hope that it will gather momentum and it will spread the message around, so more business will happen. I'll say it from my personal experience, doing business in Britain or with Britain generally is easier, if not for any other reason. It's the language that helps versus the rest of Europe. And it is also this cultural affinity which I cannot explain. Probably the ambassador described it well by having the three countries sitting at the birthbed of the Greek nation. So there is an affinity that goes. The roots are very deep in both countries, going from the British side down to the classics, and and from the Greek side to the birth of the nation. So I think it is a matter of perseverance and business focus, but that's up to businessmen rather than politicians.
Thank you.
No, sorry, Francis.
No, not a bit. I mean, I was just reflecting as the ambassador and Costas were talking. I mean, Brits of my generation kind of grew up with a reverence for Greece, but ancient Greece. I mean, as the birthplace of Western civilization, democracy, and so on. And I was just reflecting, it's probably 5 years since I started being deeply involved with Greece again, having been involved when I was deeply involved in European Union matters. And just in this last few years, that you, as an outsider, but very affectionate towards Greece, coming here, you sense it's a very forward-looking country now, and very outward-looking, and has a confidence that I've not seen in Greece for some time, and that's exciting. And I hope that that's what Britain will be as Britain kind of comes to terms with its new life outside the European Union, where to be successful, Britain will need both to have a strong and collaborative and continue to be very intertwined economically and culturally with our neighbours and partners in the European family, but also building on the historic global links and approach that Britain has historically had. And in a funny way, I think Britain needs to find some of that sense of confidence and that Greece, I feel, has and has quite recently rediscovered, and that's exciting. And when you talk about the kind of collaboration on the energy transition, which is going to be hugely important over this coming period, actually, this is a natural partnership. Strong links, a need to make the transition, a strong sense of the realities which force this. Every government comes out of the pandemic with its public finances in a worse state than they went in, and most of us went into the pandemic with our public finances not in brilliant shape, and the demands of moving to net zero in the important deadlines that we've set ourselves are going to make further demands on the public finances. So there are kind of realities that we're all looking at very close to now, and none of us are going to find the answers to this on our own. And so if you look at some of the technologies, we talked about hydrogen, hugely important, and both the UK and Greece are well placed to be kind of hubs for hydrogen technology. Other renewables, solar, wind, these are great areas for collaboration. So, I think this next period is going to be an exciting one for the relationship between us. Partly because there just is an existing and already a bond, a sense of comfort with each other, but also a sense of actually what I hope will be a joint sense of optimism and an upbeat sense of what the future can hold for us both.
Thank you very much. Ambassador, I have a question, and I'm sure that the other two gentlemen can contribute also, but since your position is much more hands-on on this issue. Cyprus is a big part of the Greek-British relationship for many, many years. This national issue for us is very contentious, but I think right now with the tragedy in Ukraine, with illegal invasion by Russia, Cyprus comes at the front again as a very important issue that can create. We can now understand that issues like this can create problems. Great Britain is a guarantor power. Greece is a guarantor power. Turkey is a guarantor power. With the new urgency on issues like this after the Ukraine illegal invasion by Russia, do you think that we have a new window of opportunity to restart the efforts on resolving this issue?
That's a very good question. And I think it depends very much in terms of what time frame we're talking about. Because I think, candidly, and I stand by the point because it's very much British government policy, that we remain committed to working to pursue a settlement. And I also acknowledged up front that from a Greek Cypriot perspective, Greek and Greek Cypriot perspective, the continued division of the island is understandably at the forefront of people's minds when they look at what's happening in Ukraine. But I also think we need to be honest with ourselves and with each other, that at the moment the clear and immediate danger and threat is bringing an end to the illegal Russian invasion and occupation of Ukrainian territory, and addressing the existential threat, I think in many ways, that for European democracies and for Western democracies, the behavior of Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin is presenting us at the moment. And let's not, of course, ignore the fact that Russian links in Cyprus are not insignificant, and Russia has traditionally played a role in the Security Council and elsewhere in efforts. Not always been a negative role, not always been a positive role. So my message would be that the determination remains undimmed. In the near term, the focus, I think, necessarily and quite properly has to be dealing with the Ukraine crisis. So I wouldn't hold out the prospect of early movement of substance. But of course, we've also discussed, those who look at the Cyprus situation and politics in the Eastern Mediterranean, that we're now pretty much into the last 12 months of an electoral, before an electoral period in Turkey, here in Greece, and in the Republic of Cyprus. So there are those voices who are saying, oh, well, you need to wait and see what the elections produce. Our argument has been, and I think we've had support from the Greek government in saying this, our argument has been, well, yes, of course, we can't ignore the politics, but we must not allow those whose interest it is to just entrench the status quo to think that we're not going to continue to push for a settlement, because we are, and we must, and we should. But I wouldn't like here to sit here and predict exactly how and when we are going to be able to take that forward. But the ambition and the recognition of the importance of it has not changed.
We have 4.5 minutes. To all of you, the last question. Greece, as you mentioned before, works more expansively the last few years with countries in the periphery of the Eastern Mediterranean, with Israel, with the Arab countries, with the countries of Northern Africa. On all these areas, Great Britain has traditional roots for decades, even centuries, you can say. Do you think that both our countries can cooperate on this issue and use these relationships that Greece works hard to formulate right now in order to strengthen our bilateral relationship? No.
Well, I'm here in Greece at the end of a 2-week trip where I've been through much of the Gulf and finally in Egypt, in Cairo, before coming here. So I'm very conscious of the issues you refer to. I mean, I think Greece taking more of a regional leadership role is very important. And I've seen that in the Western Balkans as well, and that's a strong factor and really important, because there is some read across from what Putin's done in Ukraine into some of the Western Balkans, and I think Greece, as a confident, outward-looking country, has a role to play in that, for sure. And in the Middle East and North Africa, for sure, I think there are ways in which we can collaborate very strongly.
Thank you, Mr. Mitropoulos. And we have 2-minute warning. Just saying.
I'll spend half of it.
Okay.
I think international relations and spreading the message around is a good platform for cooperation with Britain. There's no doubt. But to have effective international relations, I'm not a politician, neither an expert. I think you need to be driven by something to do with business. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It just remains words, words, words. So Greece and Britain will have to sit together and find areas of common economic interest that they can jointly develop with the help of other countries. That will be the best way forward. And the British footprint in the Middle East and the Gulf, and the Greek renewed efforts to establish a footprint there could be synchronized.
Thank you. Ambassador, last word.
Very briefly, I mean, yes, in a nutshell, I do think there's enormous potential for cooperation. I too, like Francis Maude, have recognised the broader focus and dynamism of Greece since I was last here 20-odd years ago. Given the UK's relationships with countries in the Middle East and North Africa, I think that's of crucial importance. And a topical subject, perhaps, to wrap up on, let's not forget, we are both countries who believe in and support the rule of law.
Yeah.
And whether that's UNCLOS, whether that's sovereignty, whether it's the rights and values that we represent and are proud to represent, the UK and Greece are together on that. And that is relevant today and will be relevant in 6 months' time.
Very good.
And on that note, I want to thank all of you very much for this fruitful and informative discussion. And I hope to see you next year under better circumstances with this strategy to be done in the heart of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.